The wind howled as the storm clouds gathered overhead, darkening the skies like a massive swirling vortex of chaos. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of tension that only comes before a natural disaster. It wasn't just any storm. This was the kind of storm that people talk about for years, the kind that leaves everything in its wake upended and broken, the kind of storm that's rumored to carry wind speeds that could tear apart buildings, rip trees from the ground, and leave devastation behind. But in that moment, none of that mattered more than one thing: my daughter. She's not like most children. She doesn't run, jump, or play in the park with the other kids. She can't. My daughter was born with a disability that restricts her movement. Her wheelchair is her lifeline, her way of navigating the world. But when the storms come, she is vulnerable in ways that others can't fully understand. We've been through hurricanes, tornadoes, and severe weather before, but this storm was different. The emergency alerts flashed on our phones, telling us to take shelter immediately to find a safe space. The HOA had promised us a safe haven. They promised all the residents a storm shelter that would be accessible and prepared for anything. But on this day, when it mattered most, I was about to learn that promises, much like the storm itself, can be shattered in an instant. We made our way toward the shelter, my heart pounding in my chest as the wind picked up, the temperature dropped, and the first raindrops began to splatter against the concrete. My daughter, wrapped in layers of warmth, clutched her wheelchair's armrest, her face full of worry. I held her hand, squeezing it gently, offering as much comfort as I could in that terrifying moment. We could hear the sounds of neighbors rushing to the shelter, some of them looking panicked, others shouting to one another as they made their way towards safety. But we didn't just have to get to the shelter, we had to get in. We had to be sure we were safe. As we reached the entrance of the shelter, my heart sank. There, standing in the doorway, was Karen, the very person who had promised us that we would have a safe place to go. The same person who had assured us, time and time again, that everyone would be accommodated. I saw her at the door, her arms crossed and a cold, steely expression on her face. She looked at us, and for a moment, it seemed like she didn't even recognize us. She didn't even seem to care. "We need to get inside, Karen," I said, my voice shaky as the storm's fury began to intensify. "My daughter is disabled. We need shelter now." But instead of stepping aside, Karen's expression hardened. She shook her head, a dismissive motion that cut through the air like a slap in the face. "Sorry," she said, her tone flat, unbothered. "The shelter's full." My stomach dropped. I looked around. The shelter door was wide open. People were coming in and out, some of them casually chatting, others checking their phones. But I saw no crowd. The shelter wasn't full. And yet Karen stood there, blocking the entrance, her body rigid with authority. I could feel my blood start to boil. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was life-threatening. "You don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. "She can't walk, Karen. She can't run to another shelter. You promised there would be space for us." I could see the coldness in Karen's eyes, the lack of empathy, the complete disregard for our situation. She didn't care that my daughter was vulnerable. She didn't care that I was terrified. She didn't care about the storm tearing through the skies just outside, threatening to destroy everything in its path. "We don't have room," Karen repeated. Her voice had a finality to it, and I could hear the unmistakable edge of something darker in her tone. Something unspoken, yet all too clear. She wasn't going to let us in. I stood there, frozen for a moment, as the weight of her words crashed into me like the storm's first wave. This wasn't a simple refusal. This was a choice she had made to ignore not just my daughter's needs, but the very promise she had made to every resident in this community. It was a choice to disregard the most basic human decency. I wasn't going to let this go. I couldn't. I wasn't about to leave my daughter out in the storm, not when there was a shelter just a few feet away, not when the very person who was supposed to ensure our safety was the one standing in our way. "Karen," I said, my voice cracking with emotion, "please, you have to help us. We have nowhere else to go." But Karen didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped back, turning her back to me as though I was no longer a concern, as though we were invisible. The door behind her creaked open as someone inside tried to peer out, but Karen quickly shut it again, her eyes briefly flickering to mine with an expression of something I couldn't quite place. Indifference? Disdain? Or something far darker? My heart raced in my chest as I took a step forward, trying to push past her, desperate to get inside. But Karen didn't move. She stepped forward, too, her body blocking the doorway like a wall. No, she said again, this time her voice cold, her posture unmoving. Don't do this, Karen. I pleaded, my voice rising with panic now. My daughter is depending on you. That's when it happened. The moment that would forever be etched in my memory. The moment that sealed the fate of that storm shelter, of my daughter's safety, and of Karen's true nature. She looked at me, looked at my daughter, and without a second thought, she slammed the door shut in front of us. The sound of the latch clicking echoed in my ears like a cruel joke. The storm raged on outside, and there we stood, helpless, stranded in the middle of a raging disaster. But what happened next? The part you don't see coming? That's the twist that changed everything. As the storm clouds gathered, the urgency of our situation became clearer with every passing minute. My daughter, Sarah, is like most children in many ways, curious, loving, and full of dreams. But she is also different. Sarah was born with a severe disability that limits her mobility. She relies on a wheelchair to get around, something that, at times, feels like a constant reminder of her vulnerability. While she's learned to live with it, it's moments like these moments when the skies darken and the winds pick up that I'm reminded of just how fragile her world can be. When the storm warning came through, I knew what needed to be done. The HOA had promised to open the community's storm shelter for all residents, ensuring that everyone, no matter their age or physical ability, would have a safe place to ride out the storm. It was supposed to be a refuge, a space where no one was turned away, where everyone could stay safe. But Karen, the head of the HOA, had other plans. Over the years, I'd had my share of interactions with her, but none quite like this. On the surface, she was supposed to be the one ensuring our safety, coordinating resources, and keeping the peace. But in that moment, she was a wall, one that stood between us and safety. Despite her promises and her position of authority, Karen made it clear that my daughter was not welcome in that shelter. With the storm fast approaching, I was left facing an unimaginable choice: fight for my daughter's right to shelter or face the storm without any protection. The decision was not just about survival, it was about standing up for what's right. The wind howled like a freight train, whipping through the trees with such intensity that the branches bent in unnatural directions. The air had taken on a sharp, biting edge, a forewarning of the chaos that was about to unfold. It felt as though nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to release its fury. The sky was no longer a soft blue. It had morphed into a menacing shade of gray, thick with clouds that seemed to roll and churn like a boiling pot. You could almost feel the pressure building in the air, the kind of pressure that precedes a violent eruption. The first raindrops fell, heavy and relentless, splattering against the ground with such force that it was as if the sky itself had begun to cry. The storm shelter, located just a few blocks away, had been promised as a safe haven. The HOA had spent months preparing it, installing reinforced doors and windows, setting up enough space for all the residents in case of emergency. It was supposed to be the one place where we could find refuge, where families like mine could take cover from nature's wrath. The shelter was a small concrete building, tucked away at the back of the community, surrounded by a chain-link fence that seemed almost symbolic in its attempt to provide security. Inside, it was supposed to be warm, dry, and above all safe. But with every gust of wind, with every flash of lightning that lit up the sky, my sense of security began to erode. The sound of the storm was deafening, a constant roar that rattled the windows and shook the very ground beneath our feet. People were already rushing toward the shelter, some with rain-soaked jackets clinging to their backs, others dragging kids or elderly relatives behind them. You could hear the chaos unfolding as neighbors shouted to one another, some expressing concern, others calling out for help. The fear was palpable. It was no longer just about the storm. It was about survival. Sarah's wheelchair rolled slowly across the slick pavement as I guided her forward, her face a mixture of anxiety and confusion. The shelter felt miles away, and with every step, I could sense the rising panic within me. The storm was intensifying, and I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on my shoulders. Every minute that passed made it clearer. If we didn't get inside soon, we might not make it. Yet, little did I know, the true danger wasn't the storm outside, it was the one that waited for us behind the shelter's doors. As we approached the entrance to the storm shelter, the roar of the wind and rain drowned out everything else. My heart raced, the urgency of the situation pressing heavily on my chest. I could feel the cold droplets pelting against my skin, but all I could focus on was getting Sarah inside, out of the storm's path, into a place where she could be safe. The shelter wasn't far now, just a few feet ahead, but it felt like miles. With every gust of wind, I felt the vulnerability of my daughter more keenly. She was already struggling to maintain her grip on her wheelchair's armrest, the wind threatening to knock her over. As we got closer to the shelter's door, I noticed Karen standing by the entrance. She was blocking the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was unreadable at first, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach turn. She didn't look concerned or empathetic. She looked indifferent. In fact, she almost seemed annoyed that we were there at all. I took a deep breath and pushed Sarah's wheelchair toward the door. "We need to get inside, Karen," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "The storm's getting worse. My daughter is disabled, and she can't stand or walk. We need shelter now." Karen barely looked at us as she straightened up, blocking the doorway with a deliberate step forward. There was a long moment of silence. Then, without missing a beat, she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said coolly, not a hint of concern in her voice. "The shelter's full. You can't come in." My mind scrambled to process her words. "What do you mean the shelter's full?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The shelter's door was wide open, people were still walking in, and there was no sign of anyone being turned away. "There's plenty of space inside. You have to let us in." Karen shook her head, her eyes narrowing slightly as if this was all an inconvenience. "I'm sorry, but I can't make exceptions," she said, her tone dismissive. "We have protocols. We can't let anyone in unless there's space." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. The storm was picking up. We had no place to go. But Karen wasn't backing down. She was cold, detached, and in that moment I realized she didn't care. My daughter's safety meant nothing to her. "You promised us, Karen," I said, feeling the pressure building in my chest. "This shelter is supposed to be for everyone. No one should be left out. You promised the community that it would be accessible." Karen's expression barely flickered. She didn't apologize, didn't show any empathy. Instead, she crossed her arms tighter and took a step back, as if she had no further explanation to give. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice almost flat. "You'll have to wait until the storm passes. If you can't wait, try the other shelters." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, try the other shelters?" I demanded. "There are no other shelters. This is it. We have nowhere else to go." Karen looked past me, her gaze drifting off toward the horizon where the storm raged, her expression unchanging. "There's nothing I can do," she said, almost as if she were speaking to herself, not to me. The frustration inside me began to boil over. Sarah's wheelchair wasn't going to help her get to another shelter in this weather. And the fact that Karen was so dismissive, so completely unhelpful, made my blood boil. How could she just stand there and turn us away, knowing the storm was about to hit? I felt powerless, my hands shaking as I tried to think of another way in. But Karen's posture was firm, her resolve clear. She wasn't going to let us in, and that fact was sinking in with terrifying clarity. In that moment, I realized the storm outside wasn't the only danger we faced. The real danger was the cold, heartless refusal of someone who had the power to protect us and chose not to. The wind howled louder, almost deafening now, as the storm reached its peak. The rain came down in sheets, the kind that stun your skin and soak through clothing within seconds. Sarah clutched her wheelchair tightly, trying to steady herself against the whipping gusts. I stood beside her, feeling the terror build inside of me. The storm was a force of nature, yes, but it was nothing compared to the force of Karen's refusal. She had become an immovable obstacle, and my daughter's life depended on my next move. Karen, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger, this is not a game. My daughter can't survive out here in this storm. We need shelter now. But Karen's response was colder than the rain pouring down on us. Without a word, she took a step back, gesturing toward the entrance. I thought she was finally going to let us in, but instead, she turned her back on us. My heart skipped a beat. Was she just going to leave us out here? Was she really going to turn her back as the storm raged on? The panic that hit me in that moment was unlike anything I had felt before. I rushed forward, my hand reaching out, desperate to stop her. Please, Karen, I'm begging you. But Karen didn't budge. She was already moving toward the shelter's heavy hatch, the one that separated us from safety. I watched in shock as she swung the door shut, the loud clank of metal on metal echoing in the growing chaos around us. My entire body froze. No, she couldn't be doing this. Karen, I screamed, stepping forward, my voice breaking. Don't you dare close that hatch. Please, my daughter needs to be inside. Karen's eyes flickered over her shoulder, and for a moment I thought I saw something, a hint of hesitation. But it disappeared as quickly as it appeared. With a cold, calculated motion, she grabbed the latch, pulling it down with finality. The shelter's heavy door groaned as it locked, cutting off all access to safety. I felt a wave of disbelief crash over me. She was locking us out, locking my daughter out in the middle of a storm. No, 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 no. I shouted, frantic now, my voice breaking under the pressure of the moment. I banged on the door, desperate for her to open it again. But Karen didn't even flinch. She didn't respond, didn't even look back. She had already sealed our fate. I turned to Sarah, whose face had gone pale with shock. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely audible over the storm. Mom, what's happening? Why can't we go inside? The question broke my heart in ways words could never describe. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand why the world was suddenly turning so cruel. I knelt beside her, my fingers brushing her cheek as the wind tugged at my clothes. I'm so sorry, baby, I whispered, the weight of the situation pressing down on me with unbearable force. We're going to get through this. I won't let her do this to you. But deep down, I knew the truth. The storm outside wasn't the only enemy we were fighting. It was Karen's refusal to help, her heartless action that was slowly suffocating us, trapping us out in the open with nowhere to turn. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime, and the hopelessness of our situation began to set in. I looked back at the closed hatch, my mind racing for answers, for a way out. But in that moment, the harsh reality hit me. We were on our own. And the only way to survive this was to make Karen realize what she had done, even if it meant doing whatever it took to get the help we desperately needed. The sound of the storm grew louder, the wind whipping through the trees, the rain hitting the ground with a deafening fury. I stood there, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. Karen had locked us out. She had slammed the hatch in our faces, leaving my daughter and me stranded in the middle of the storm. The reality of the situation hit me like a cold wave. We were exposed, vulnerable, and the storm wasn't showing any signs of letting up. I turned to Sarah, whose face had lost all color. She was shaking now, both from the cold and from the fear. I could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the pain. This wasn't just a storm. It was the betrayal of someone we had trusted, someone who had promised to keep us safe. My heart ached as I looked at my daughter, struggling to maintain her composure, her wheelchair caught in the heavy downpour. She was trying to stay calm, trying to hold herself together. But I could see it, she was scared. The storm wasn't just outside, it was inside her too. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "What are we gonna do?" Tears welled up my eyes as I looked down at her, my throat tight. How could I explain to her that the one place we thought we could find safety, the one person who was supposed to protect us, had turned their back on us? How could I tell her that the storm outside wasn't our only danger? That the one person who held the key to our safety had chosen not to help? "We'll figure it out, baby," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I wiped the rain from my face, my hands trembling. "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." But deep down, I was terrified. The storm was only getting worse, and every minute we spent out here in the open made us more vulnerable. We had nowhere else to go. I glanced around, searching for any signs of help, any place we could take shelter, but all I saw was the same chaotic scene, people running for cover, cars racing past, and not a single soul willing to step in. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. There was no one coming to our rescue, no one but me. It was up to me to protect my daughter, to find a way out of this nightmare. But the thought of leaving her out here in the middle of this storm was unbearable. "Mom," Sarah said again, her voice more desperate this time. "I don't want to die out here. I want to go inside." Her words cut through me like a blade. How could I let my daughter feel this way? How could I let her think that I wasn't doing everything I could to keep her safe? I couldn't. I had to act. I had to do something. Just then, a figure appeared in the distance, someone running toward us through the rain, their face barely visible through the downpour. It was another resident from the neighborhood, someone I didn't recognize. They were drenched, their clothes clinging to their body, but their eyes were focused on us. Without a word, they reached us, and I saw the concern in their eyes. "Are you okay?" they asked, their voice barely audible over the storm. "No," I said, shaking my head. "We need to get inside. Karen won't let us in. She locked us out. My daughter can't survive out here." The stranger looked at Sarah, then back at me, and I could see the wheels turning in their mind. Without another word, they grabbed Sarah's wheelchair handle and began to help me push her toward the shelter again. "We're not giving up," they said, determination in their voice. "We'll get you inside." At first, I was hesitant, unsure of what would happen if Karen saw us trying to force our way back in. But as we approached the shelter again, the stranger's resolve pushed me forward. They stood between us and the door, knocking loudly, demanding that Karen open it. I could hear Karen's voice from inside, muffled by the thick door, but she didn't respond right away. "What do you think you're doing?" she finally shouted from inside. "This shelter is full. You're not allowed in." But the stranger didn't back down. "There's a disabled child out here. You promised to protect everyone. Open this door, or we'll get the authorities involved." For a moment, there was silence. Then, to my surprise, the hatch creaked open. Karen's face appeared in the gap, her eyes flashing with annoyance. But the stranger didn't let up. "This isn't right. Open it now." Karen hesitated, and for the first time, I saw doubt in her eyes. She was standing in the doorway, no longer the immovable force she had been earlier. I could sense her reluctance, but she knew that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about someone's life. It was about my daughter's life. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, Karen opened the door wider, stepping aside. The stranger nodded at us, and we wheeled Sarah inside. As we crossed the threshold, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We were finally safe. But it wasn't just the physical safety that mattered. It was the realization that in that moment of desperation, when it seemed like all hope was lost, we had fought for what was right. We had found a way to push through the walls that had been built around us. We had survived, and I knew in my heart that no matter what happened next, I would always fight to protect my daughter. Always. As we settled inside the shelter, the door slamming shut behind us, I thought the nightmare was finally over. The chaos of the storm outside seemed like a distant memory compared to the intense battle we had just fought against Karen's refusal. My heart slowed its frantic pounding as I wheeled Sarah into the back corner of the shelter, grateful that we were safe, at least for the moment. The wind howled outside, but here, at least, we had some protection. But just as I began to breathe a sigh of relief, something unexpected happened. The stranger who had helped us, the one who had stood up to Karen, approached me again. Their face was still tense, but their eyes were filled with something that made my heart skip a beat: suspicion. "They're watching you," the stranger said, quietly, as though they didn't want anyone else to hear. "Who?" I asked, confused. "Karen," they whispered. "She didn't want you in here, but she's not done with you. She's been keeping tabs on everyone coming in. She's been reporting to someone, making sure certain people get turned away." A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't understand. Why would Karen go through such lengths to keep us out? And now, why was she still watching us? What was her real motive? The stranger continued, lowering their voice even more. "She didn't just lock the door because the shelter was full. She did it because she didn't want you here. And the reason? It's not just about space. It's because you've been talking to other residents. She doesn't want you to rally the others. She's afraid people will start questioning her authority." I stood frozen, stunned. The truth of the situation began to unravel before me in a way I hadn't expected. Karen wasn't just a cold, uncaring HOA leader. She was intentionally manipulating the shelter's resources, selectively choosing who got in and who was left outside based on personal vendettas. My mind raced as I tried to piece it all together. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. She was controlling the shelter to maintain power, and anyone who might challenge her would face her wrath. The realization hit me hard. What had seemed like a random, heartless act was actually part of a much darker agenda. And now it was clear. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was an adversary we couldn't afford to ignore. The storm eventually passed, its fury diminishing into a heavy drizzle, but the aftermath of the night remained etched in my mind. Inside the shelter, the tension was palpable. People huddled together, seeking warmth and safety, but there was an underlying discomfort, an unease that spread through the room like a silent contagion. It wasn't just the storm outside that had shaken us. It was the storm of betrayal we had experienced, one that left scars deeper than any weather could inflict. Sarah, exhausted and shaken, had curled up in my arms, her eyes barely open as she drifted off to sleep. I gently stroked her hair, my mind still reeling from everything that had transpired. The fear and anxiety that had gripped her earlier were slowly giving way to a sense of safety, but I knew the damage had been done. I knew she would never forget the look of indifference on Karen's face, the way she had been denied the protection every human being deserves. As the storm subsided, the shelter started to empty, people leaving to assess the damage to their homes. But not everyone was as lucky as we were. Some didn't make it to the shelter in time. Some were left stranded in the open. The news quickly spread that Karen had locked the shelter doors on certain people, and the community was abuzz with anger and confusion. What had happened was no longer just an isolated incident. It was a breach of trust, a violation of the promises that had been made to every resident. The HOA board, once the figurehead of authority in the neighborhood, was now under fire. Neighbors began speaking up, calling for an investigation into Karen's actions. The fallout was swift. People demanded accountability, and soon enough, Karen found herself in the midst of a community-wide backlash. She couldn't hide behind her position anymore. The truth had come out, and the damage to her reputation was irreversible. As for me, I knew I couldn't just walk away from this. I had to stand up, not only for Sarah, but for the others who had been treated unjustly. The shelter had become a symbol of the betrayal we had all endured. The storm may have passed, but the fight for what was right was far from over. For Sarah, for the community, and for myself, this would be a turning point. We wouldn't let this go unnoticed. In the weeks that followed, Karen's authority was questioned, and new leadership began to emerge in the HOA. It wasn't the end, but it was a victory, a small, yet powerful moment of justice. But for me and Sarah, the emotional wounds ran deep, and I knew it would take time for the scars to fade. The aftermath of Karen's actions was swift and unforgiving. The community, once divided on many issues, now found a common cause: holding Karen accountable for her blatant misuse of power. Word spread quickly about her refusal to allow my daughter into the storm shelter, and it wasn't long before other residents began speaking up about their own experiences with her. What initially seemed like an isolated incident grew into a much larger issue of abuse of authority and negligence. From a legal standpoint, the HOA board was immediately faced with the threat of legal action. The discrimination and unjust refusal of shelter to a vulnerable resident could not be ignored. Local advocacy groups and attorneys specializing in civil rights reached out, offering their support. They argued that Karen had violated not only the moral obligations of the HOA, but also disability rights laws that mandate equal access to services, especially during emergencies. The legal community began to take notice, and class action lawsuits were discussed as other residents came forward to share their grievances. The community itself demanded change. Homeowners began petitioning for Karen's immediate removal from her position. Neighbors organized meetings to discuss the need for reform within the HOA, focusing on transparency, inclusivity, and fairness in emergency procedures. Many residents expressed that Karen's actions had shaken their trust in the HOA's ability to protect them, and they no longer felt secure under her leadership. In the face of mounting pressure, Karen was removed from her position by the HOA board. The legal implications were far-reaching, and although she was not criminally prosecuted, her actions had irreparably damaged her reputation and standing within the community. The shelter's policies were revised, and an independent review committee was established to ensure that no one would ever be denied safety again. Though it wasn't a perfect resolution, it was a start. Karen's downfall marked a turning point in how the community viewed its own responsibility to each other, and it highlighted the importance of holding those in power accountable. The events that unfolded that night taught me a powerful lesson about the fragility of trust and the strength of standing up for what's right. It wasn't just about the storm or the shelter, it was about the human instinct to protect each other, especially those who are most vulnerable. My daughter, Sarah, needed protection, and in that moment, Karen's refusal to help wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a breakdown of the very principles of community and empathy. The key lesson I learned is that we all have a responsibility to look out for one another. It's easy to assume that someone else will take care of the problem, that the system will work as it's supposed to, but in reality, sometimes it doesn't. And when that happens, it's up to us as individuals and as a community to step in and do what's right, even when it feels daunting. When Karen closed the shelter door in our faces, it was a stark reminder that people in power can sometimes act out of indifference or even malice, especially when there's no one to challenge them. But this story also demonstrated that the power of community can overcome even the coldest actions. When we stood up, when others rallied behind us, it showed me that collective action, fueled by compassion and a commitment to fairness, can create real change. For anyone reading this, the lesson is clear: never underestimate the impact of standing up for someone else. Whether it's advocating for someone in need, challenging an unjust system, or simply offering a helping hand in times of crisis, our actions matter. We all play a part in building a community that is not just a collection of people living in proximity, but a network of individuals who care for each other, especially when times are tough. Finally, it taught me that empathy isn't just a passive feeling, it's an active choice. We must choose to understand, choose to act, and choose to protect those who can't always protect themselves. That night, it wasn't just about getting into the shelter, it was about standing up for Sarah, for the vulnerable, and for what's right no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it may be. If you've ever felt like your voice wasn't being heard, or like someone in power wasn't looking out for you when you needed it most, this story is for you. The fight for justice doesn't end with one person's struggle. It takes a community of people who care and stand up for what's right. If you believe that everyone deserves equal protection and to be treated with dignity and respect, take action now. Share your own experiences with us. How have you stood up against injustice in your community? Subscribe to HOA Denied Access for more stories like this and to continue the fight for fairness and accountability. Together, we can make a difference and hold those in power accountable. Stand up, speak out, and never stop fighting for what's right. Join us today. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Your support and engagement mean the world to us. We've seen firsthand how powerful community action can be and how important it is to speak up when something isn't right. I hope this story has inspired you to continue advocating for fairness and justice, not only in your own life, but in the lives of those around you. If you enjoyed this video and want to stay up to date with more powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified about our future content. HOA Denied Access is here to bring you the truth, spark change, and make sure the voices of those who have been wronged are heard. Thanks again for being a part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and stay strong.